The history of Mary Prince, a West Indian slave related by herself, continued. I had seen my poor mother during the time I was a slave in Turks Island. One Sunday morning, I was on the beach with some of the slaves, and we saw a sloop come in loaded with slaves to work in the salt water. We got a boat and went aboard. When I came upon the deck, I asked the black people, "Is there anyone here for me?" "Yes," they said, "your mother." I thought they said this in jest. I could scarcely believe them for joy. But when I saw my poor mammy, my joy was turned to sorrow, for she had gone from her senses. "Mammy," I said, "is this you?" She did not know me. "Mammy," I said, "what's the matter?" She began to talk foolishly and said that she had been under the vessel's bottom. They had been overtaken by a violent storm at sea. My poor mother had never been on the sea before, and she was so ill that she lost her senses, and it was long before she came quite to herself again. She had a sweet child with her, a little sister I had never seen, about 4 years of age, called Rebecca. I took her on shore with me, for I felt I should love her directly, and I kept her with me a week. Poor little thing, hers has been a sad life, and continues so to this day. My mother worked for some years on the island, but was taken back to Bermuda some time before my master carried me again thither. After I left Turks Island, I was told by some negroes that came over from it that the poor slaves had built a place with boughs and leaves where they might meet for prayers, but the white people pulled it down twice and would not allow them even a shed for prayers. A flood came down soon after and washed away many houses, filled the place with sand, and overflowed the ponds. And I do think that this was for their wickedness, for the back remain. They were very wicked. I saw and heard much that was very bad at that place. I was several years the slave of Mr. D. After I returned to my native place, here I worked in the grounds. My work was planting and hoeing sweet potatoes, Indian corn, plantains, bananas, cabbages, pumpkins, onions, and etc. I did all the household work, and attended upon a horse and cow besides, going also upon all errands. I had to curry the horse, to clean and feed him, and sometimes to ride him a little. I had more than enough to do, but still it was not so very bad as Turks Island. My old master often got drunk, and then he would get in a fury with his daughter and beat her till she was not fit to be seen. I remember on one occasion I had gone to fetch water, and when I was coming up the hill, I heard a great screaming. I ran as fast as I could to the house, put down the water, and went into the chamber, where I found my master beating Miss D dreadfully. I strove with all my strength to get her away from him, for she was all black and blue with bruises. He had beat her with his fist and almost killed her. The people gave me credit for getting her away. He turned round and began to lick me. Then I said, "Sir, this is not Turks Island." I can't repeat his answer. The words were too wicked, too bad to say. He wanted to treat me the same in Bermuda as he had done in Turks Island. He had an ugly fashion of stripping himself while naked and ordering me then to wash him in a tub of water. This was worse to me than all the lick. Sometimes when he called me to wash him, I would not come. My eyes were so full of shame. He would then come to beat me. One time I had plates and knives in my hand, and I dropped both plates and knives, and some of the plates were broken. He struck me so severely for this that at last I defended myself, for I thought it was high time to do so. I then told him I would not longer live with him, for he was a very indecent man, very spiteful, and too indecent, with no shame for his servants, no shame for his own flesh. So I went away to a neighboring house and sat down and cried till the next morning. When I went home again, not knowing what else to do, After this, I was hired to work at Cedar Hills, and every Saturday night I paid the money to my master. I had plenty of work to do there, plenty of washing, but yet I made myself pretty comfortable. I earned $2.25 a week, which is 20 pence a day. During the time I worked there, I heard that Mr. John Wood was going to Antigua. I felt a great wish to go there, and I went to Mr. D and asked him to let me go in Mr. Wood's service. Mr. Wood did not then want to purchase me. It was my own fault that I came under him. I was so anxious to go. It was ordained to be, I suppose. God led me there. The truth is, I did not wish to be any longer the slave of my indecent master. Mr. Wood took me with him to Antigua, to the town of St. John's, where he lived. This was about 15 years ago. He did not then know whether I was to be sold, but Mrs. Wood found that I could work, and she wanted to buy me. Her husband then wrote to my master to inquire whether I was to be sold. Mr. D wrote in reply that I should not be sold to anyone that would treat me ill. It was strange he should say this when he had treated me so ill himself. So I was purchased by Mr. Wood for $300 or £100 Bermuda currency. My work there was to attend the chambers and nurse the child, and go down to the pond and wash clothes. But I soon fell ill of the rheumatism and grew so very lame that I was forced to walk with a stick. I got the St. Anthony's fire also in my left leg, and became quite a cripple. No one cared much to come near me, and I was ill a long, long time. For several months, I could not lift a limb. I had to lie in a little old outhouse that was swarming with bugs and other vermin, which tormented me greatly. But I had no other place to lie in. I got the rheumatism by catching cold at the pond side from washing in the fresh water. In the salt water, I never got cold. The person who lived in the next yard, a Mrs. Green, could not bear to hear my cries and groans. She was kind, and used to send an old slave woman to help me, who sometimes brought me a little soup. When the doctor found I was so ill, he said I must be put into a bath of hot water. The old slave got the bark of some bush that was good for the pains, which she boiled in the hot water, and every night she came and put me into the bath, and did what she could for me. I don't know what I should have done or what would have become of me had it not been for her. My mistress, it is true, did send me a little food, but no one from our family cared near me but the cook, who used to shove my food in at the door and say, "Molly, Molly, there's our dinner." My mistress did not care to take any trouble about me, and if the Lord had not put it into the heart of the neighbors to be kind to me, I really think, have lain and died. It was a long time before I got well enough to work in the house. Mrs. Woods, in the meanwhile, hired a mulatto woman to nurse the child. But she was such a fine lady, she wanted to be mistress over me. I thought it was very hard for a colored woman to have rule over me, because I was a slave and she was free. Her name was Martha Wilcox. She was a saucy woman, very saucy, and she went and complained of me without cause to my mistress and made her angry with me. Mrs. Wood told me that if I did not mind what I was about, she would get my master to strip me and give me 50 lashes. "You have been used to the whip," she said, "and you shall have it here." This was the first time she threatened to have me flogged, and she gave me the threatening so strong of what she would have done to me that I thought I should have fallen down at her feet. I was so vexed and hurt by her words. The mulatto woman was rejoiced to have power to keep me down. She was constantly making mischief. There was no living for the slaves, no peace after she came. I was also sent by Mrs. Woods to be put in the cage one night, and was next morning flogged by the magistrate's order at her desire. And this all for a quarrel I had about a pig with another slave woman. I was flogged on my naked back on this occasion, although I was in no fault after all, for old Justice there, when we came before him, said that I was in the right and ordered the pig to be given me. This was about 2 or 3 years after I came to Antigua. When we moved from the middle of the town to the point, I used to be in the house and do all the work and mind the children, though still very ill with the rheumatism. Every week I had to wash 2 large bundles of clothes, as much as a boy could help me to lift, but I could give no satisfaction. My mistress was always abusing and fretting after me. It is not possible to tell all her ill language. One day she followed me foot after foot, scolding and rating me. I bore in silence a great deal of ill words. At last, my heart was quite full, and I told her that she ought not to use me so, that when I was ill I might have lain and died for what she cared, and no one would then come near me to nurse me, because they were afraid of my mistress. This was a great affront. She called her husband and told him what I had said. He flew into a passion, but did not beat me then. He only abused and swore at me, and then gave me a note and bade me go and look for an owner. Not that he meant to sell me, but he did this to please his wife and to frighten me. I went to Adam White, a cooper, a free black, who had money, and asked him to buy me. He went directly to Mr. Wood, and was informed that I was not to be sold. The next day, my master whipped me. Another time, about 5 years ago, my mistress got vexed with me because I fell sick and could not keep on with my work. She complained to her husband, and he sent me off again to look for an owner. I went to a Mr. Burchell, showed him the note, and asked him to buy me for my own benefit, for I had saved about $100 and hoped, with a little help, to purchase my freedom. He accordingly went to my master, Mr. Wood, and he said, "Molly has brought me a note that she wants an owner. If you intend to sell her, I may as well buy her as another." My master put him off and said that he did not mean to sell me. I was very sorry at this, for I had no comfort with Mrs. Wood, and I wished greatly to get my freedom. The way in which I made my money was this. When my master and mistress went from home, as they sometimes did, and left me to take care of the house and premises, I had a good deal of time to myself and made the most of it. I took in washing and sold coffee and yams and other provisions to the captains of ships. I did not sit still idling during the absence of my owners, for I wanted by all honest means to earn money to buy my freedom. Sometimes I bought a hoe cheap on board and sold it for double the money on shore, and I also earned a good deal by selling coffee. By this means, I by degrees acquired a little cash. A gentleman also lent me some to help buy my freedom, but when I could not get free, he got it back again. His name was Captain Abbott. My master and mistress went on one occasion into the country to Date Hill for a change of air, and carried me with them to take charge of the children and to do the work of the house. While I was in the country, I saw how the field Negroes are worked in Antigua. They are worked very hard and fed but scantily. They are called out to work before daybreak and come home after dark. And then each has to heave his bundle of grass for the cattle in the pen. Then on Sunday morning, each slave has to go out and gather a large bundle of grass. And when they bring it home, then have all to sit at the manager's door and wait till he come out. Often have they to wait there till past 11 o'clock without any breakfast. After that, those that have yams or potatoes or firewood to sell hasten to market to buy a dog's worth of salt fish or pork, which is the great treat for them, which is a great treat for them. Some of them buy a little pickle out of the shard barrels, which they call sauce, to season their yams and Indian corn. It is very wrong, I know, to work on Sunday or to go to market, but will not God call the bondmen to answer for this on the great day of judgment, since they will give the slaves no other day? While we were out there hill, Christmas came, and the slave woman who had the care of the place, which then belonged to Mr. Roberts, the marshal, asked me to go with her to her husband's house to a Methodist meeting for prayer at a plantation called Winthorpe's. I went, and they were the first prayers I ever understood. One woman prayed, and then they all sung a hymn, and then there was another prayer and another hymn, and then they all spoke by turns of their own griefs as sinners. The husband of the woman I went with was a black driver. His name was Henry. He confessed that he had treated the slaves very cruelly, but said that he was compelled to obey the orders of his master. He prayed them all to forgive him, and he prayed that God would forgive him. He said it was a horrid thing for a ranger to have sometimes to beat his own wife or sister, but he must do so if ordered by his master. I felt sorry for my sins also. I cried the whole night, but it was too much ashamed to speak. I prayed God to forgive me. This meeting had a great impression on my mind and led my spirit to the Moravian church, so that when I got back to town, I went and prayed to have my name put down in the missionary's book, and I followed the church earnestly every opportunity. I did not then tell my mistress about it, for I knew that she would not give me leave to go, but I felt I must go. Whenever I carried the children their lunch at school, I ran round and went to hear the teachers. The Moravian ladies, Mrs. Richter, Mrs. Olofsen, and Mrs. Sauter, taught me to read in the class, and I got on very fast. In this class, there were all sorts of people, old and young, gray-headed folks and children, but most of them were free people. After we had done spelling, we tried to read in the Bible. After the reading was over, the missionary gave out a hymn for us to sing. I dearly loved to go to the church. It was so solemn. I never knew rightly that I had much sin till I went there. When I found out that I was a great sinner, I was very sorely grieved and very much frightened. I used to pray God to pardon my sins for Christ's sake, and forgive me for everything I had done amiss. And when I went home to my work, I always thought about what I had heard from the missionaries, and wished to be good that I might go to heaven. After a while, I was admitted a candidate for the Holy Communion. I had been baptized long before this, in the year 1817, by the Reverend Mr. Curtin of the English Church, after I had been taught to repeat the Creed and the Lord's Prayer. I wished at that time to attend a Sunday school taught by Mr. Curtin, but he would not receive me without a written note from my master, granting his permission. I did not ask my owner's permission from the belief that it would be refused, so that I got no further instruction at that time from the English church. Sometime after I began to attend the Moravian church, I met with Daniel James, afterwards my dear husband. He was a carpenter and cooper to his trade, an honest, hard-working, decent black man, and a widower. He had purchased his freedom of his mistress, old Mrs. Baker, with money he had earned whilst a slave. When he asked me to marry him, I took time to consider the matter over with myself. I would not say yes till he went to church with me and joined the Moravians. He was very industrious after he bought his freedom, and he had hired a comfortable house and had convenient things about him. We were joined in marriage about Christmas 1826 in the Moravian chapel at Spring Gardens by the Reverend Mr. Olofsen. We could not be married in the English church. English marriage is not allowed to slaves, and no free man can marry a slave woman. When Mr. Wood heard of my marriage, he flew into a great rage and sent for Daniel, who was helping to build a house for his old mistress. Mr. Wood asked him who gave him a right to marry a slave of his. My husband said, "Sir, I am a free man. I thought I had a right to choose a wife. But if I had known Molly was not allowed to have a husband, I should not have asked her to marry me." Mrs. Wood was more vexed about my marriage than her husband. She could not forgive me for getting married, but stirred up Mr. Wood to flog me dreadfully with the horse whip. I thought it very hard to be whipped at my time in life for getting a husband. I told her so. She said that she would not have nigger men about the yard and premises or allow a nigger man's clothes to be washed in the same tub where hers were washed. She was fearful, I think, that I should lose her time in order to wash and do things for my husband. But I had then no time to wash for myself. I was obliged to put on my own clothes, though I was always at the washtub. I had not much happiness in my marriage owing to my being a slave. It made my husband sad to see me so ill-treated. Mrs. Wood was always abusing me about him. She did not lick me herself, but she got her husband to do it for her, while she fretted the flesh off my bones. Yet for all this she would not sell me. She sold 5 slaves while I was with her, but though she was always finding fault with me, she would not part with me. However, Mr. Wood afterwards allowed Daniel to have a place in our yard, which we were very thankful for. After this, I fell ill again with the rheumatism and was sick a long time. But whether sick or well, I had my work to do. About this time, I asked my master and mistress to let me buy my own freedom. With the help of Mr. Burchell, I could have found the means to pay Mr. Wood, but it was agreed that I should afterwards serve Mr. Burchell well for the cash he was to advance to me. I was earnest in the request to my owners, but their hearts were hard, too hard to consent. Mrs. Wood was very angry. She grew quite outrageous. She called me the Black Devil and asked me who had put freedom into my head. To be free is very sweet, I said, but she took good care to keep me a slave. I saw her change color and I left the room. About this time, my master and mistress were going to England to put their son to school and bring their daughters home, and they took me with them to take care of the child. I was willing to come to England. I thought that by going there, I should probably be cured of the rheumatism and should return with my master and mistress quite well to my husband. My husband was willing for me to come away, for he had heard that my master would free me, and I also hoped this might prove true, but it was all a false report. The steward of the ship was very kind to me. He and my husband were in the same class in the Moravian church. I was thankful that he was so friendly, for my mistress was not kind to me on the passage, and she told me, when she was angry, that she did not intend to treat me any better in England than in the West Indies, that I need not expect it, and she was as good as her word. When we drew near to England, the rheumatism seized all my limbs, worse than ever, and my body was dreadfully swelled. When we landed at the tower, I shewed my flesh to my mistress, but she took no great notice of it. We were obliged to stop at the tavern till my master got a house, and a day or two after, my mistress sent me down into the washhouse to learn to wash the English way. In the West Indies, we wash with cold water. In England, with hot. I told my mistress I was afraid that putting my hands first into the hot water and then into the cold would increase the pain in my limbs. The doctor had told my mistress long before I came from the West Indies that I was a sickly body and the washing did not agree with me. But Mrs. Wood would not release me from the tub, so I was forced to do as I could. I grew worse and could not stand to wash. I was then forced to sit down with the tub before me, and often through pain and weakness was reduced to kneel or to sit down on the floor to finish my task. When I complained to my mistress of this, she only got into a passion as usual and said washing in hot water could not hurt anyone, that I was lazy and insolent and wanted to be free of my work, but that she would make me do it. I taught her very hard on me, and my heart rose up within me. However, I kept still at that time. I went down again to wash the child's things. But the England washerwomen who were at work there, when they saw that I was so ill, had pity upon me and washed them for me. After that, when we came up to live in Leigh Street, Mrs. Woods sorted out 5 bags of clothes which we had used at sea, and also such as had been worn since we came on shore, for me and the cook to wash. Elizabeth the cook told her that she did not think I was able to stand to the tub, and that she had better hire a woman. I also said myself that I had come over to nurse the child, and that I was sorry I had come from Antigua, since mistress would work me so hard without compassion for my rheumatism. Mr. and Mrs. Wood, when they heard this, rose up in a passion against me. They opened the door and bade me get out. But I was a stranger and did not know one door in the street from another and was unwilling to go away. They made me a dreadful uproar, and from that day they constantly kept cursing and abusing me. I was obliged to wash, though I was very ill. Mrs. Wood indeed once hired a washerwoman, but she was not well treated and would come no more. My master quarreled with me another time about one of our great washings, his wife having stirred him up to do so. He said he would compel me to do the whole of the washing given out to me, or if I again refused, he would take a short course with me. He would either send me down to the brig in the river to carry me back to Antigua, or he would turn me at once out of doors and let me provide for myself. I said I would willingly go back if he would let me purchase my own freedom. But this enraged him more than all the rest. He cursed and swore at me dreadfully, and said he would never sell my freedom. If I wished to be free, I was free in England, and I might go and try what freedom would do for me, and be dead. My heart was very sore with this treatment, but I had to go on. I continued to do my work, and did all I could to give satisfaction, but all would not do. Shortly after, the cook left them, and then matters went on 10 times worse. I always washed the child's clothes without being commanded to do it, and anything else that was wanted in the family. Though still I was very sick indeed. When the great washing came round, which was every 2 months, my mistress got together again a great many things, such as bed ticks, bed coverlets, and etc. for me to wash. I told her I was too ill to wash such heavy things that day. She said, I thought myself a free woman, but I was not, and if I did not do it directly, I should be instantly turned out of doors. I stood a long time before I could answer, for I did not know well what to do. I knew that I was free in England, but I did not know where to go or how to get my living, and therefore I did not like to leave the house. But Mr. Wood said he would send for a constable to thrust me out, and at last I took courage and resolved that I would not be longer thus treated. but would go and trust to Providence. This was the fourth time they had threatened to turn me out and go where I might. I was determined now to take them at their word, though I thought it very hard after I had lived with them for 15 years and worked for them like a horse to be driven out in this way like a beggar. My only fault was being sick and therefore unable to please my mistress, who thought she never could get word enough out of her slaves, and I told them so, but they only abused me and drove me out. This took place from 2 to 3 months, I think, after we came to England. When I came away, I went to the man Warmash, who used to black the shoes of the family, and asked his wife to get somebody to go with me to Hatton Garden to the Moravian missionaries. These were the only persons I knew in England. The woman sent a young girl with me to the mission house, and I saw there a gentleman called Mr. Moore. I told him my whole story and how my owners had treated me, and asked him to take in my trunk with what few clothes I had. The missionaries were very kind to me. They were very sorry for my destitute situation and gave me leave to bring my things to be placed under their care. They were very good people, and they told me to come to the church. When I went back to Mr. Wood to get my trunk, I saw a lady, Mrs. Pell, who was on a visit to my mistress. When Mr. and Mrs. Wood heard me come in, they set this lady to stop me, finding that they had gone too far with me. Mrs. Pell came out to me and said, "Are you really going to leave, Molly? Don't leave, but come into the country with me." I believe she said this because she thought Mrs. Wood would easily get me back again. I replied to her, "Ma'am, this is the fourth time my master and mistress has driven me out, or threatened to drive me, and I will give them no more occasion to bid me go." I was not willing to leave them, for I am a stranger in this country, but now I must go. I can't stay no longer to be so used. Mrs. Pell then went upstairs to my mistress and told that I would go, and that she could not stop me. Mrs. Wood was very much hurt and frightened when she found I was determined to go out that day. She said if she goes, the people will rob her and then turn her adrift. She did not say this to me, but she spoke it loud enough for me to hear, that it might induce me not to go, I suppose. Mr. Wood also asked me where I was going to. I told him where I had been, and that I should never have gone away had I not been driven out by my owners. He had given me a written paper some time before which said that I had come with them to England by my own desire, and that was true. It said also that I left them of my own free will because I was a free woman in England, and that I was idle and would not do my work, which was not true. I gave this paper afterwards to a gentleman who inquired into my case. I went into the kitchen and got my clothes out. The nurse and the servant girl were there, and I said to the man who was going to take out my trunk, "Stop, before you take out this trunk, and hear what I have to say before these people. I am going out of this house as I was ordered, but I have done no wrong at all to my owners, neither here nor in the West Indies. I always worked very hard to please them, both by night and day, but there was no given satisfaction, for my mistress could never be satisfied with reasonable service. I told my mistress I was sick, and yet she has ordered me out of doors. This is the fourth time, and now I am going out." And so I came out, and went and carried my trunk to the Moravians. I then returned back to Mash, the shoeblack's house, and begged his wife to take me in. I had a little West Indian money in my trunk, and they got it changed for me. This helped to support me for a little while. The man's wife was very kind to me. I was very sick, and she boiled nourishing things up for me. She also sent for a doctor to see me. He sent me medicine which did me good. Though I was ill for a long time with the rheumatic pains, I lived a good many months with these poor people, and they nursed me, and did all that lay in their power to serve me. The man was well acquainted with my situation, as he used to go to and fro to Mrs. Wood's house to clean shoes and knives, and he and his wife were sorry for me. About this time, a woman of the name of Hill told me of the Anti-Slavery Society and went with me to their office to inquire if they could do anything to get me my freedom and send me back to the West Indies. The gentleman of the society took me to a lawyer who examined very strictly into my case, but told me that the laws of England could do nothing to make me free in Antigua. However, they did all they could for me. They gave me a little money from time to time to keep me from want, and some of them went to Mr. Wood to try to persuade him to let me return a free woman to my husband. But though they offered him, as I have heard, a large sum for my freedom, he was sulky and obstinate, and would not consent to let me go free. This was the first winter I spent in England, and I suffered much from the severe cold and from the rheumatic pains, which still at times torment me. However, Providence was very good to me, and I got many friends, especially some Quaker ladies who, hearing of my case, came and sought me out and gave me good warm clothing and money. Thus I had great cause to bless God in my affliction. When I got better, I was anxious to get some work to do, as I was unwilling to eat the bread of idleness. Mrs. Marsh, who was a laundress, recommended me to a lady for a charwoman. She paid me very handsomely for that work I did, and I divided the money with Mrs. Marsh. For though very poor, they gave me food when my own money was done, and never suffered me to want. In the spring, I got into service with a lady who saw me at the house where I sometimes worked as a charwoman. This lady's name was Mrs. Force. She had been in the West Indies and was accustomed to blacks and liked them. I was with her 6 months and went with her to Margate. She treated me well and gave me a good character when she left London. After Mrs. Force went away, I was again out of place and went to lodgings, for which I paid 2 shillings a week and found coals and candle. After 11 weeks, the money I had saved in service was all gone, and I was forced to go back to the anti-slavery office to ask a supply till I could get another situation. I did not like to go back. I did not like to be idle. I would rather work for my living than get it for nothing. They were very good to give me a supply, but I felt shame at being obliged to apply for relief, whilst I had strength to work. At last, I went into the service of Mr. and Mrs. Pringle, where I have been ever since, and am as comfortable as I can be, well separated from my dear husband, and away from my own country and all old friends and connections. My dear mistress teaches me daily to read the Word of God and takes great pains to make me understand it. I enjoy the great privilege of being enabled to attend church 3 times on the Sunday, and I have met with many kind friends since I have been here, both clergymen and others. The Reverend Mr. Young, who lives in the next house, has shown me much kindness and taken much pains to instruct me, particularly while my master and mistress were absent in Scotland. Nor must I forget among my friends the Reverend Mr. Mortimer, the good clergyman of the parish, under whose ministry I have now sat for upwards of 12 months. I trust in God I have profited by what I have heard from him. He never keeps back the truth, and I think he has been the means of opening my eyes and ears much better to understand the Word of God. Mr. Mortimer tells me that he cannot open the eyes of my heart, but that I must pray to God to change my heart and make me to know the truth, and the truth will make me free. I still live in the hope that God will find a way to give me my liberty and give me back to my husband. I endeavor to keep down my fretting and to leave all to him, for he knows what is good for me better than I know myself. Yet I must confess, I find it a hard and heavy task to do so. I am often much vexed and I feel great sorrow when I hear that some people in this country say that the slaves do not need better usage and do not want to be free. They believe the foreign people who deceive them and say slaves are happy. I say, not so. How can slaves be happy when they have the halter round their neck and the whip upon their back, and are disgraced and thought no more of than beasts, and are separated from their mothers and husbands and children and sisters, just as cattle are sold and separated? It is happiness for a driver in the field to take down his wife or sister or child and strip them and whip them in such a disgraceful manner. Women that have had children exposed in the open field to shame. There is no modesty or decency shown by the owner to his slaves. Men and women and children are exposed alike. Since I have been here, I have often wondered how English people can go out into the West Indies and act in such a beastly manner. But when they go to the West Indies, they forget God and all feeling of shame. I think since they can see and do such things, they tie up slaves like hogs, more than up like cattle, and they lick them, so as hogs or cattle or horses never were flogged. And yet they come home and say, I made some good people believe that slaves don't want to get out of slavery, but they put on a cloak about the truth. It is not so. All slaves want to be free. To be free is very sweet. I will say the truth to English people who may read this history that my good friend Mrs. S is now writing down for me. I have been a slave myself. I know what slaves feel. I can tell by myself what other slaves feel and by what they have told me. The man that says slaves be quite happy in slavery, that they don't want to be free, that man is either ignorant or a lying person. I never heard a slave say so. I never heard a Bakra man say so till I heard tell of it in England. Such people ought to be ashamed of themselves. They can't do without slaves, they say. What's the reason they can't do without slaves as well as in England? No slaves here, no whips, no stocks, no punishment except for wicked people. They hire servants in England, and if they don't like them, they send them away. They can't like them. Let their work ever so hard in England, they are far better off than slaves. If they get a bad master, they give warning and go to hire to another. They have their liberty. That's just what we want. We don't mind hard work if we have proper treatment and proper wages like English servants and proper time given in the week to keep us from breaking the Sabbath. But they won't give it. They will have work, 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 night and day, sick or well, till we are quite done up. We must not speak up nor look amiss, however much we be abused. And then we are quite done up. Who cares for us more than for a lame horse? This is slavery. I tell it to let English people know the truth. And I hope they will never leave off to pray God and call out to the great King of England till all the poor blacks be given free and slavery done up forevermore.